meeting to order. And I will start by acknowledging that in Ottawa, we meet on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on April 29th, 2021, the committee is meeting on its study of the sex trafficking of Indigenous peoples. To ensure an orderly meeting, I'd like to outline best practices. Participants, you can speak and listen in the official language of your choice. Now, the choice means on the bottom center of the screen, there is a globe. You select that globe and then select English or French, the preferred language. Then, as we proceed, if you wish to speak in either of the other languages, there's no need to make any technical adjustments. But you should be on the language of your choice as we begin. So look for that. And when you speak, please speak slowly and clearly. When you're not speaking, your microphone should be on mute. With us today for the rest of the time available to us are the following witnesses. We have Tricia Bapti, Community Engagement Coordinator of EVE, and Karen Pictou, Executive Director of the Nova Scotia Native Women's Association. Our witnesses will give opening statements. We're usually around 6 minutes, but we'll offer you as much time as you need to complete the sentiments that you wish to share. And then I should tell you that when we go to questioning, there's no requirement to answer any questions that may cause you discomfort. We understand the sensitivity of things, and so please don't ever feel that you need to engage in any question or other conversation that causes you discomfort. And so having said that, I ask Karen Pictou, the Executive Director of the Nova Scotia Native Women's Association, to present her testimony first. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me to speak at this very important meeting today. And I'm going to apologize up front because I was invited to this meeting late last week and I haven't had due time to prepare as thoroughly as I would normally like to. So I've written some speaking notes, but I am going to kind of just wing it a bit as well. And please feel free to ask all the questions that you want at the end. So I am Karen Pictou. I'm Mi'kmaq from Millbrook First Nation, Nova Scotia. I am a mother of 4 daughters and 3 grandsons, and I'm the daughter of Bill Pictou and Philippa Pictou. I'm the Executive Director of Nova Scotia Native Women's Association, and I came to this role 3 years ago. I followed my heart, leaving a well-established career I had made for myself working in First Nation employment and partnership development, and took a bit of a leap of faith to enter into this role because I felt that it spoke to my heart. It spoke to my lived experience, and it spoke to what makes me feel good about the work that I do. And I feel that I bring a lot to this position, not only from what I've learned in school or what I've learned in my career, but what I've learned through life as being a Mi'kmaq woman, living off reserve for my childhood, moving back on reserve, being a teenage mother, being a victim of sexual violence, being a victim of domestic violence, and also, which one person at least on here knows, I was also a victim of human trafficking. So I feel that my life experience has brought me full circle to be in this role and to feel that I'm making a positive impact, not only for my community and for our province of Nova Scotia, but for all Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit people across the country. So I take this role very seriously, and I have given it my all. And when I came into this role 3 years ago, I didn't know a whole lot about Nova Scotia Native Women's. And I knew, the gist, that they were an entity that spoke up for, the needs of Indigenous women in our province. And, they had long-standing history. But I've learned so much more since entering. And so Nova Scotia Native Women's Association is actually the 3rd oldest organization, a Mi'kmaq organization in Nova Scotia. And following the release of the White Paper Policy in 1969, there was a large political uprising of the Mi'kmaq in Nova Scotia. And that led to the creation of our first two Mi'kmaq organizations in 1969 and 1970, being the Micmac News out of Membertou, and then the Union of Nova Scotia Indians, which is now called the Union of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq, which is one of our two tribal councils in Nova Scotia. And during this time, the white paper policy really made it very clear that the government of Canada wished to cause extinction of First Nations people across Canada through policy. However, Indigenous women across Canada were already facing this threat of extinction through government policy through the Indian Act. So this was not a new situation to Mi'kmaq women of Nova Scotia. However, it became a situation that impacted all Mi'kmaq people of Nova Scotia. So even after the white paper policy not going through, the political uprising continued and our realization of our rights. However, during that time, Indigenous women still were excluded from politics, whether it be within the province or on reserve. Shortly after, we had our first two female chiefs elected in Nova Scotia. And a community member from from Membertou named Helen Martin. She traveled to each of our communities in 1970 and gathered the women, and were talking about the issues of the day. And all of the women agreed that there needed to be something done in order to address these ongoing issues and the threat to Indigenous women. Survival, as well as their right to be Mi'kmaq and to be a part of our communities, and all that is held with that. So at that time, they all agreed unanimously that they would create Nova Scotia Native Women's Association, and we were founded in 1972. So next year we'll be celebrating our 50th anniversary. However, despite Nova Scotia Native Women's Association being one of the oldest and highly recognizable Mi'kmaq organization in the province, we continue to struggle and be in survival mode up until about 2.5 years ago, when we finally received 3 years ago now, when we finally received core funding, provincially long-term core funding, and then shortly after received a smaller amount of short-term federal core funds. The federal core funds have now been cut, to my understanding, despite the increase of capacity and the increase of work being asked of us by Canada to assist with things like human trafficking, to assist with economic development for Indigenous women and girls, to assist with healing our communities. However, that valuation has not transcended to giving us core funding to take us out of survival mode and proposal-based funding. That needs to happen in order to address human trafficking. Nova Scotia Native Women's Association is the only Indigenous organization in Nova Scotia that is working to address human trafficking and to provide supports and services for those impacted and currently in human trafficking and leaving. There are a number of issues that cause us to be more vulnerable, including colonialism. That was the first one, right? That completely impacted the way that our people lived, viewed gender roles. Mi'kmaq people had very strict gender roles, not to say women were less valued. Certainly not. Women were highly valued, as well as Two-Spirit people. However, colonialism changed that and flipped that on its head. Sorry, I feel like I'm rambling a bit now. So I'll get back onto topic. So in 2014, Nova Scotia Native Women's Association opened the Jane Paul Indigenous Women's Resource Centre. And it was in response to a large number of Indigenous women and girls who were involved in the street sex trade in Sydney, Nova Scotia. The population in Sydney is only around 25,000 people. However, there are at least 80 Indigenous women and girls working on 2 city blocks in Sydney. This would amount to over 800 non-Indigenous women on 2 city blocks. This issue is glaring We see it. We see these women all the time. However, I don't know that most of Sydney really, truly see these women. They see them as an obstacle and want to push them further out into the industrial areas. This is going to cause more harm. The Jane Paul Center is one of its kind. I don't know of one that exists anywhere close by in the Atlantic region. We started off from one office space in this little office I'm actually sitting in right now. It's about 500 square feet. That's where we started. Over the last few years, we were able to expand to take over the basement of this building. That offered us some workshop space and a private counseling room. And now this year, we're actually planning a grand opening of. We've taken over occupancy of 95% of this building. So we're able to offer the services that were still gaps. So, and some of those things still need to come to fruition. For example, the need of having a family court lawyer accessible to our women. Many of the women that are accessing the center on a daily basis are being impacted by poverty, by the child welfare system, by grief and loss, by the Indian residential schools, as well as being descendants of Indian residential school survivors. Um, Many of our women first language is Mi'kmaq, and they prefer speaking in Mi'kmaq. And many of them have experienced violence. And many of them have been impacted by MMIWG cases here in Nova Scotia. So they come in here with a huge amount of barriers, but with a lot of hope still. And here at the center, we thrive on that hope. We try to build that hope and we try to give them the tools that they need to survive, to flourish, and to have options. And I think that's the biggest thing when we're talking about how to address human trafficking. We can get someone out of the life, but what options will they have? What opportunities will they have to sustain themselves, to not go back to that life, to be able to have a secure home, to be able to fight to get their access to their children again, all of those things. And if they cannot do that, I guarantee you they'll slip back into that life despite its atrocities. So here at the Jane Paul Center, we have a full-time counselor on staff. We have program coordinators. We actually just opened up a new space called a maker space where women can come in and they can make a craft and they can sit with an elder, a cultural support person. They can talk, they can learn new skills. And when they're done making that, we actually buy it from them. And then we'll put it into our Sisterness Trading Post, which is right next door to me here. That grand opening is happening soon and it's online. So I'll plug that later. But they can get money in hand right then and there to go get what they need to be able to go have, a meal downstairs collectively together. They can go to our food bank. They can, take in a workshop. They can, get clean needles. They can get condoms, whatever it is that they need at that moment. But the main thing is they're taking in a cultural activity, they're having a supportive environment, and they're leaving here with food in their bellies and money in their hand so that they may not have to go back onto that street that night. And here, there's a variety of ways that human trafficking looks like. Yes, human trafficking happens in the classic ways of thinking of, this charming man comes and grooms a young girl and, convinces her of this dream in the big city and takes her off. Sure, that happens. That happens every day here in Nova Scotia, and we see that. But it also happens many times to our women here of being vulnerable, grieving, maybe being a product of the child welfare system, maybe having parents with addiction issues, maybe having, vulnerability of poverty and lack of housing or lack of education and becoming prey to various things. Then getting into drugs and, that type of thing. They don't see themselves as human trafficking victims most of the time. They say, no, that's my boyfriend. He loves me. But would your boyfriend still love you if you said no, that you weren't going to work the streets that night? Would your boyfriend still love you if you weren't paying for his addiction as well? Mm, chances are the answer would be no. And so it's very difficult for a lot of these women to even view themselves as being a victim of human trafficking. They feel they're making the choice. They feel that they've made their bed, they'll lay in it. This is the only choices that they have. And it's simply not true. And so, what we hope to do here is to find the hope through hopelessness, not to, isolate them and say, oh, you've got to leave your boyfriend or he's harmful for you. No, to give them the tools to make that choice on their own. And so, all of this being said, I could talk on and on.
Oh, we need to move on because we have 4 more. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I'll just wrap up by talking about our next most important initiative, and then I'll just leave it for questions after that. So with all of this work, not only with human trafficking, domestic violence, MMIWG, all of these things that we're working on, we're thinking, what do we need to really be able to complete this work? Because one of the most glaring things that we see here in Nova Scotia is there is no safe space for us to heal. Absolutely none. We could go to a hotel. It's not safe. There's people drinking there. We're not allowed to smudge there. We're not allowed to do ceremony there. We can go to the resort. Same thing. There's absolutely no safe space in Nova Scotia for Indigenous people to heal from the hundreds of years of complex trauma that we're all dealing with. And that needs to change. And our resiliency center that I know Lenore has been a huge advocate for, it needs to happen. We have an application now into the Green Inclusive Energy. We have completed a feasibility plan. It is widely accepted by all Mi'kmaq organizations across our province, and it needs to happen now. And I urge you to please let Minister McKenna know how important this project is. In order for us to be able to heal, we need it to be led and centered in a safe space that is owned by Indigenous women. And thank you very much.
Thanks very much for that. And now we're going to bring in our 2 other witnesses to do their sound checks. Ms. Bapti, we'll get to you next, but first of all, we're going to make sure that we can see and hear the other 2 witnesses. So, Madam Clerk, please go ahead with that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we can start with Ms. Perrier. So if you could just give us a few words while we get thumbs up from the interpreter.
Hello. My name is Bridget.
The weather there, Bridget. How's the weather there?
Weather's really hot.
Okay, well, thank you. We got the thumbs up. Sorry about that. So we'll move on to Ms. Gobert. So if you can give us a few words as well while we wait for the thumbs up from the interpreter, please.
Good morning.
Good morning. Perhaps you can just give us a few words about the weather.
The weather is fine. It's nice and sunny here.
Excellent. So we can hear you well. Thank you.
Thanks very much. The point of that, the weather forecast, is just to get enough words in so that we can hear it. Now, both of the people who have just joined us, make sure that the bottom center of your screen, there's a globe. And in that, when you select the globe, you'll find English or French. Choose the language that you wish to hear in. And when you're speaking, you can change back and forth, but you should be selecting either English or French on that icon. And having said that, we're going to go now to Ms. Bapti. And thank you for being here, Tricia, and please go ahead.
Unmuted now?
Good.
Am I good to go? Okay. Hi. Thanks so much for having me. I just found out I was going to do this late last week, So, like the speaker before me, it's a little hobbled together, and I hope you'll have patience for that. 6 minutes is not enough, but I hope I have constructed something vaguely coherent here. So, I am speaking to you from Vancouver on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Traditionally, for the last 20 years or so, events have been started by acknowledging the traditional lands on which one stands, which I think is a good tradition to remind us where we are. But as non Indigenous people speaking to those that look like me, this acknowledgement needs to drive us to look further into the history of where we are. Traditional territory acknowledgement is a not so subtle code for stolen land. And today, especially as we discuss Indigenous women and girls, it is imperative for settlers to understand how stealing land equates the complete destabilization of Indigenous people, but particularly women and girls. We need to sit with these words, clearly identifying the issues and how it feeds into the topic we will be discussing. I want to state clearly for the record, I am not an Indigenous woman. One of my son's fathers is from a band in C, but I cannot speak from an Indigenous experience. But I can speak to what I have lived through with my friends and their families as they invited me into their lives, as well as the amazing people I have met all over the country as I do this work. I can speak to the abuses I saw my friends suffer at the hands of police, social workers, men, and society at large. So I'm going to quickly explain who I am. I am a survivor of government care. I was apprehended just before my 13th birthday, which would also be when I was exposed to the world of trafficking and prostitution. I would get out at 28 for a total of 15 years of being exploited. Some of my friends are still being sexually exploited. So many of my friends and I started being sexually exploited as minors. I find it infuriating that there are those who wish to draw an arbitrary line, saying at 18 girls and women choose prostitution. I would like them to tell me what and how we could have accessed to get out of that lifestyle. Being Caucasian, I had one or two extra options, but my Aboriginal friends had few, if any, options that would have saved us from the violent, ongoing sexual exploitation. We lost loved ones to a serial killer and lived through horrors I will not go into. I was a citizen journalist at the Picton trial, and my CV, can go on for quite a while. But we have a question before us, although written like a statement. Why is sex trafficking amongst Indigenous people so high when they do not make up a high percentage of the population? What if we did not look at that question, actually? We know why. Women and girls are trafficked to meet the male-driven demand for paid sex. They are more vulnerable because life on their territories, or for the high numbers of youth who find themselves in foster care, that life can be horrible. And they What if we flip the whole question and conversation and ask why we think men should be able to pay for sex? Where is the legal binding policy or human right that states men paying for sex is a protected act? How does allowing any Canadian man to pay for sex help create a safer society for Indigenous women and girls, or anyone for that matter? We keep sex consensual by not commodifying it. And PSEPA helps us do this. I am a big policy law person. I quite like the finite details. So I really want to talk about the challenge to Canada's prostitution laws that's happening right now in Ontario, because they would affect not only all women, but particularly Indigenous women and girls. In Ontario, they would like to strike down impeding traffic, which is Section 213, public communication, which is Section 213 1.1, purchasing, which is the buying of sex, materially benefiting, so making money off the prostitution of someone else, and recruiting. They want recruiting decriminalized. Whose neighborhood would we have street prostitution in? I live in a poor neighborhood. That's where they go, is my neighborhood. Whose school or job fairs will the recruitment tables be at? Where will the billboards be? Pretty much all of prostitution, all of the prostitution provisions they're looking at are predatory because it relies a third party making money, recruiting, selling, advertising a third party. And it's all young women, right? We're not talking about educated 40-year-old women secure in their career. We're talking about marginalized, vulnerable youth. And we need to, really be thinking that. Now it's, prostitution is euphemistically called being a sugar baby or something like that. But the core of it is the same. Men taking advantage of women. Pimps and traffickers would now become businessmen. If the tearing down of the criminal code happens, all of this will legitimate exploitation and abuse. All these laws stop the parasitical and predatory benefit from another's abuse. PSEPA benefited women or anyone being sold because it changed the way they were to be viewed, and they were supposed to get assistance. So I know my time's done. I don't want to go over. I know there's a lot of other people. So I'm just going to say a last two things. There was never a time in my friendships that I have to this day with my friends who are Indigenous that I wasn't aware that we were treated differently because of the way we looked. And that's a really bad feeling. But I learned really early in life how to try and interject myself in situations, if I could, to benefit from the way I looked. And women and girls who are being exploited, who are at risk for trafficking, who, live around man camps and resource extraction sites and live with that very real threat every day, need intervention that benefits them, not anyone else. It's my last little. I know my time here is done, but there's so much to say. So I'm just going to end with this. Indigenous people, women, girls, my friends and loved ones deserve 1,000,000 times better than what they live today. I mean, like, no clean water? How can we fight human trafficking if we're still fighting for water? I want to live the rest of my life not burying one more friend. Now we are bearing daughters, unfortunately. And as things don't drastically change, if Indigenous people aren't given what they need to recover from the trauma that haunts them daily, given what is rightfully theirs, and if Canada does not bend to the ways of its original keepers, rather than demanding adherence to colonial ways, things won't change. And I will bury more friends, and that rips my heart out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tricia. And part of today's activity, of course, is hearing a round of questions from our panel, which is a really important component because we need to see how we've been influenced by the things that we're being told by our witnesses. So we'll get to our questions, but right now we have two more witnesses to hear from, Ms. Perrier and Ms. Gobert. And Ms. Perrier, would you please go ahead? 6 minutes or whatever you feel you need. Go ahead.
Okay, Ani, first I'd like to acknowledge my standing here on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of New Credit that fall upon the two Wampum Treaty. I represent Sex Trade 101 and the many Anishinaabeg women and girls who are enslaved in prostitution and or trafficked. My name is Wasteakwe. My English name is Bridget Perrier. I was born in Thunder Bay, Ontario, and placed up for adoption. I was adopted by a good family who tried to raise me the best way possible. But as I got older, the effects of colonialism, intergenerational trauma, and child sexual abuse made me a perfect candidate for prostitution. I was lured and debased into prostitution at the age of 12 from a child welfare run group home. I remained enslaved for 10 years in prostitution. I was sold to men who felt privileged to steal my innocence and invade my body. I was paraded like cattle in front of men who were able to purchase me. And the acts that I did were something no little girl should ever have to endure here in Canada, the land of the free. Because of the men, I cannot have a child normally because of trauma towards my cervix. Also, still to this day, I have nightmares, and sometimes I sleep with the lights on. My trauma is deep, and sometimes I feel, though I'm frozen, or even worse, I feel damaged and not worthy. I was traded in legal establishments, street corners, and strip clubs. I even had a few trips across the Great Lakes servicing shipmen at the age of 13. The scariest thing that happened to me was being held captive for a period of 43 hours and raped and tortured repeatedly at 14 years of age by a sexual predator who preyed on exploited girls. My exploiters made a lot of money and tried to break me, but I fought for my life. My first pimp was a woman who owned a legal brothel where I was groomed to say that I was her niece or daughter's friend if the police ever asked. My second pimp was introduced me when I was in Toronto. I had to prostitute for money. He was supposed to be a bodyguard, but that turned out to be one big lie. Both are out there still doing the same thing to more little girls somewhere here in Canada. After many years, I was able to exit prostitution and rebuild my life. And with that, my education became a tool. I was recognized for my tenacity and my strength and have been able now to be an asset to my community and my people. I am a mother, grandmother, activist, and warrior woman. And now my experiences may be sacrificial at times, but I'm doing it for Canada's Anishinaabe women and girls who are being bought and sold and who are disappearing and or murdered. We must look out who is doing this. It is the men. I have a letter because my oldest daughter, her birth mom was murdered by Robert Pickton, and she asked me to read this to you. Dear Senate, my name's Angel Wolf. My birth mom's name was Brenda Wolf. My mom was murdered by Robert Pickton. Her murder was one of the first 6 that he was charged with. I was 6 years old when she was murdered and 9 years old when her jawbone was found in a pig trough. I am one of the 98 orphans who was left behind because of that monster. I do blame Vancouver Police Department and the RCMP. I believe that bills such as Persepa will save valuable women like my mom. I'm sickened by my mom's death has been used to legitimize such indignity and sadness. I'm also sickened by the term the Picton Bill. It's insulting and a slap in the face to the 98 orphans and the organizations and the pro-sex work lobby movement should be really ashamed for speaking on behalf of families who lost their loved ones. I blame prostitution, addiction, and mental illness for my mother's death. And on behalf of the 98 orphans, we do not want our mother's deaths to be the reason prostitution is legitimized. I will make it my mission in life to carry her story and to educate people about addictions, prostitution, and the murdered and missing. Sincerely, Angel Wolf. Persepa will protect my daughters and granddaughters and other young Native girls from predator sex buyers who have the nerve to solicit in public. Just last week, I was in Thunder Bay, where buying vulnerable women is not on the agenda of their police department or MAG or any other organization. If prostitution were such a healthy path, then why aren't the sex buyers not telling their wives, girlfriends, and families that they use or have used sexual services from prostitutes? Sex Trade 101 believes that prostitution is not a choice, but it's lack of choice that keeps women and girls enslaved. We believe that everybody should be shown a viable way out of the sex trade and not be encouraged to stay in it. We believe in helping people understand the full price of life in prostitution before they become involved, and in helping women get out alive with their minds, bodies, and spirits intact. We have all been collectively afraid, raped, beaten, sold, disregarded. Most of us were also children who were forgotten, neglected, abused, used, led astray, abandoned, and not protected. Sex Trade 101 members and advocates are current and former prostituted women. We have a huge concern with the criminalization of prostituted women and girls. We have seen that diversion programs for prostituted women and girls are not only the solution we're not the only solution for everyone. We also have seen support services not, a lot of money's gone out, but we're still in this, this kind of silo. Some 85% of Sex Trade 101 advocates and members have experienced pimp violence. This is pretty far from the picture painted by the Supreme Court of Canada that pimps are nice guys. These pimps and sex buyers are the problem. They're the ones who abuse and in some cases kill. I supported my daughter throughout the missing woman inquiry, and the outcome was this. Our mothers, sisters, and daughters are not born to be used and sold for men's sexual needs. We are not commodities. Also, we want to talk about linguistics. There's nothing in the native language, in Indigenous languages, that describes selling sex. So if it's not in our language, it's not for our women. The Minister McKay, or former Minister McKay, for, creation of Bill C-36. And, because he recognized the inherent dangers and abuses for those who are prostituted. That bill was a victory for survivors and those who are stuck in the vicious cycle of indignity and pain. We need to look at the numbers. 52% of HD victims are Native, and the average age of exploitation for a Native girl is 12 years of age. And 98% of women that we've worked with, Sex Trade 101 have worked with, have said they had wanted out at some point. As a sex trade survivor, I thank you so much for giving me the honor to speaking on behalf of the survivors of Sex Trade 101 and all the Anishinaabe survivors across Canada, whether they are still in or have they exited. And what we're seeing now is the increase of, girls using social media as a tool for their exploitation, OnlyFans, sugar babies, as Trisha pointed out. And there's now a niche for Native girls. Like when I was in the game, we never once, we never said to say we're Native, because we knew if we said that we were Native, that we would be, in trouble. We would be, in trouble of being assaulted or, whatever. So we hid our identities. I'm seeing, just last week, I had a young woman from Northern Ontario sleeping on my couch because the treatment center that we paid for, $20,000 for private drug and alcohol treatment, took one look at her and said she's not fit for their program. And we had nowhere to send her. And at that moment, her 15 years of injecting drugs, she was done. And we had to think outside the box and, and figure out something radically fast. I'm seeing a lot of money going into this and not a lot of action. We don't have a safe house for Indigenous women here in Ontario. We have a lot of religious run safe houses, and I'm sorry, it's not a fit for my girls, my Indigenous girls. I always get emails. Every week I get this. Hi, Bridget. We feel that this survivor fits your criteria. Why? Because she's Indigenous and she's opened her mouth and said what she's wanted to, what she feels is best for her. And I don't know where to put them. And I'm putting my children at risk by having them in my home. But I can't send them anywhere else. So, we have the girl right now who 15 years hardcore on the street, she survived her own attempted murder on her. I could tell her story and sit here and go, holy cow, she's doing good. We have her in a bush camp and she's, off drugs. And that's like a big accomplishment. And I told her 35 days, your brain will retrain itself. And, we're in crisis. I was in Thunder Bay and it's like they're buying women left, right, and center. And the Thunder Bay police does not want to be burdened with the issue of exploitation. And they don't even want to admit that there's human trafficking going on. The pretty Native girls are being farmed to Southern Ontario and trafficked along the Golden Horseshoe. What I'm seeing now, and Trisha is saying this, has cleared on it, saying we're burying our daughters. I'm seeing girls that I was out there in the trenches with, now daughters. It's intergenerational. If we don't go and help them, figure out their potential, we're now, creating room for the new generation. And it's happening. I'm seeing now, grandma, mom, grandchild, and let's fuel in a pandemic and now an opioid crisis. We have the perfect brewing pot for exploitation. And we know that a prostituted Indigenous woman, we see when she's murdered what happens. We've the Cindy Gladoos, everything, we're just, I guess what I'm trying to say is we're in crisis here, and especially in Northern Ontario. I'm only a week out of the month in Northern Ontario. I go to Thunder Bay. That's my job. And it's like nobody knows where to go. And the people that are providing frontline are putting themselves in harm's way to help women exit. And if we just had a place to send them, it would be so much like a one-stop shop. It would be so much easier. What we're trying to do at Sex Trade 101 is, by mentoring them and we don't have core funding like that. We have to, get it through another organization. And it's still, to this day, our recidivism rate back into prostitution is only at 4%. Obviously, we're doing something right. So with that, I'd like to say miigwech, and I'm up for questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ms. Perrier. It's a remarkable testimony. And we'll go now to Janet Gobert, and take as much time as you need. Please go ahead. Janet, are you ready to go?
I'm ready to go. My name is Janet Gobert, and I am of Ojibwe descent from the Pepecasis First Nation in Saskatchewan. I currently serve as the Community Initiatives Coordinator with the Bonnyville Canadian Native Friendship Centre, located in Bonnyville, Alberta, which I acknowledge is Treaty 6 territory and is the traditional gathering place for many Indigenous people. Bonnyville Canadian Friendship Centre is dedicated to bridging the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people culturally, socially, economically, and recreationally by promoting communication and delivering effective programming within our community. In 2020, I acknowledged a gap in service provision, which could be addressed by the Ishkwe Ishkote, Where Women Heal by Fire project, that implements promising prevention and intervention practices, that advances knowledge and enhances empowerment supports for at-risk populations and survivors of human trafficking in the Bonnyville and Lakeland region. The objective of this program is to reduce the rate of violence against women and human trafficking through evidence-based programming, which includes, but is not limited to, providing a safe haven where clients will have access to relevant programming and support services. Utilizing a wraparound approach, our holistic crisis support mentor, peer support worker, Indigenous wellness worker, and critical incident stress management coordinator delivers consistent programming with traditional knowledge keepers who share their understanding on site, in addition to providing access to land-based activities and cultural ceremonies. During the development of this program, I acknowledged that assisting Indigenous women and girls transitioning out of sex work would require the support of numerous organizations within the community to address issues such as education, housing, employment, mental health, and substance abuse issues. Hence, a board indicative of the aforementioned was established. It was noted within our meetings that there are three essential components which are necessary to the creation of social and political change within the sex trade. That being, which are social services, law enforcement, and community education. The latter I would like to address. In respect to our service area, it was identified that our program needed to concentrate on community education. Within our community and surrounding area, human trafficking is not acknowledged, and this is a barrier that we needed to overcome. It was duly noted that opening this Pandora box within the community would need to be navigated with accurate information, education, and promotional tools in order to be effective. This component of our program will be executed no later than September of 2021, with continued waves of change in its wake. The debate which surrounds laws and regulations placed upon prostitution-related offenses is rooted within a framework which distinguishes prostitution as either sex work or sex trafficking. As the former represents a choice in regards to prostitution, the latter represents forcible containment within the sex trade. As legal responses to prostitution-related activities varies depending on a community's social, political, and economic commitments, criminalizing sex trafficking victims renders their experiences of violence and labor exploitation less visible, thus producing a tendency to discount the human rights of women involved in sex trafficking. As sex trafficking in Canada is inherently harmful and dangerous, specifically towards Indigenous girls and women, a public policy change must be enacted in order to address such issues. The issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls is a sociological phenomena in Canada, which is entrenched within Canadian policies, laws, and institutions. In Canada, Indigenous women and girls form only 2% of the total population, yet they constitute 16% of the total population of women who are either murdered or go missing. Traffickers choose vulnerable, exploited women because they are perceived as expendable, thus reducing them to the status of a mere sex object rather than an actual human being. Often, we have victim blamed these women for their own murders due to the high living risk lifestyle, such as working in the sex trade, whether forcibly or by choice. Through creating a program in the Lakeland region, which addresses issues such as education, employment, housing, mental health, and treatment services, it is much simpler to create an exit strategy for women within the sex trade. As Indigenous women and girls Canada face such socioeconomic issues, this could help in reducing the rate at which these women either are involved in human trafficking, go missing, or are murdered. Finally, the lack of knowledge surrounding sex trafficking and the laws which pertain to its origin of why it is so difficult to detect as well as to exit the sex trade. It is integral to understand that these women live their lives in the community as grandmothers, mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends. I would like to thank each one of you for this opportunity of sharing our new program initiative with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And we're going to go to rounds of questioning. We're a little bit limited today because of the lengthy testimony, but brilliant testimony, so important for us to hear. But please remember that the two people who are cited as analysts are remarkable in their ability to extract and put together for the purposes of our reporting the information that you're provided. So as much as we love to continue questioning for a long time, everything that you said has been important and will be captured within the report that we will eventually prepare. But having said that, we're going to go now to a round of questions, 6 minutes each. And Mr. Viersen, you're up first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. I just want to acknowledge the pain and harm that you've experienced by traffickers and men who buy sex, and I want to thank you for choosing to appear at this committee in spite of all your pain, and hope that we can bring our committee some understanding of the realities that Canadians face across this country and help to prevent others from being trafficked. So thank you very much. Previous witnesses had talked a little bit about the role of group homes, child welfare system in the places where youth are lured from. I was wondering if I could get each of you to just comment about that a little bit. We'll start with Tricia.
Child welfare, in the simplest of terms, is a complete, unmitigated disaster. It is horrible. I was at my mom's house. Someone came, told me to pack my stuff in a garbage bag, and 45 minutes later, I'm in a house and I don't know anyone. And there's some guy who keeps grabbing my ass. And when I tell my social worker I don't want him to do that, she laughs and says, boys will be boys. Just stay out of his way. We need to be working on keeping families together. Yes, that can be hard, but it's still the best. My group home was so unsafe, and no one listened to us about how unsafe it was, that we decided we would rather take our chances out on the streets. I was 12. So, you're on the streets, you meet a guy named Kelly. Kelly invites you back to his place. You have drugs and alcohol, and you think you're so cool because Kelly wants to hang out with you. And suddenly you understand that everything comes for a price, right? And that price is sex at 12, when he's probably in his 30s or 40s. I think we need to also expand what family means. I think colonialism has put a very narrow definition on what family means. And we need, sorry, I'm stuttering. I don't even know where to start. It's just so bad. Like, we need to tear it down and start all over again. That's the only way I see it working. You know, like, I've been foster parents for my friends' kids, and I've done emergency placements when, for whatever reason, and kids want their parents no matter what. Let's fix those parents so that we can fix those kids, so that this ongoing cycle of in and out of care can stop.
Tricia.
So, yeah.
Bridget?
Okay, well, what I'm seeing with child welfare, I was lured out of a child welfare run girls' home. The older girl that lured me and got me into prostitution was my older sister. Staff didn't have a clue. They were maybe 5 years older than some of us. They were young girls working in a group home with haywire teenagers. I was set out to fail right away. You know, we know 97% of non-Indigenous people who adopt Indigenous children, the adoptions fail. My parents were told that, you know, and, you know, good thing my adopted parents always stuck by, would go look for me. Just last week when I was in Thunder Bay, I was talking to a survivor, and she didn't even know who her child welfare worker was because she had 14 worker changes. 14 worker changes, and her daughter is showing high-risk behaviors, and nobody's listening to her. You know, and when I talked to the worker didn't know what I was even talking about. You know, so the issue is the child protection is designed, you know, was designed from the get-go to fail Indigenous people. You know, I'm also like Tricia. I'm actually the first survivor in Ontario to adopt a child. And I'm fostering a high-risk 14-year-old right now whose mother is out there on the street. And, you know, for us to get her treatment and you know, by saying, you know, she's at greater risk to be trafficked is, you know, and then I get my foster daughter comes home from the treatment center and says that a staff drove her to a hotel at 14 years old. The 21-year-old staff drove her to a hotel. You know, the staff's been fired and all that, but still, what is going on? You know, I'm a mother of 4 girls. My daughters, you know, I had to battle child welfare to keep my children with me. You know, even to this day, when they knock on my door, I still feel like, oh, I did something bad. You know, there's that threat. My kids are older now. My youngest is 9. You know, over my dead body, anyone's going to ever take my kids from me. You know, I have a little boy that was massively injured. His mother, too, my niece, was exploited. You know, my son received an injury in the care of Children's Aid, a broken neck, that if that injury happened in my house, all my children would have been removed. But because it happened in a registered foster home, nobody is brushed under the rug. And so many other kids' stuff have been brushed under the rugs. You know, I get it. There is a protection element when a girl is very vulnerable, especially when we're dealing with a mom who's in prostitution or in the midst of exploitation. We have to protect the young children. But we need to look elsewhere, family members, whatever, you know, whatever will work for that person. I really don't have much nice things to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Viersen, we're well over time, and in fairness, we'll perhaps the question will get picked up again. I'm going to ask Mrs. Ann to go ahead for 6 minutes. Lenore?
Thank you, and Walaliuk, and I come to you today from the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq here in Nova Scotia. And first of all, I want to say thank you so much to each of the witnesses for your very, very moving stories and personal experiences, your lived experience. It takes a lot of courage to speak out. It takes a lot of courage to share these stories with others. And until more people come forward and are heard and have people actually listening and ready to act, you're right. This cycle will continue. One of the things Canada is doing, our government is doing right now regarding human trafficking, is where we are guided by the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime and its supplement protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children. Now, it's been organized around 4 pillars: the prevention of trafficking, the protection of victims, the prosecution of offenders, and working in partnership with others. And there's a new one that's been added, which is it's called empowerment. So they've added this particular new one to enhance supports and services to victims. And I have to say, there's about $75 million that is now going to be coming for over 6 years, including $57.22 million over 5 years, and with a $10.28 million ongoing to implement an enhanced suite of initiatives to help strengthen our response and fill critical gaps. That said, how much of this issue do you feel has to do with organized crime, and how much do you feel has to do with just individuals who are exploiting women and children? Who would like to go first? Karen Pictou, would you like to go first, and Ms. Perrier, then Ms. Baptiste, and Ms. Can't see your name there.
We only have about 3.5 minutes, so Karen, please go ahead.
Quickly.
Sure. So 100% it is completely tied to organized crime. And I can kind of interconnect the last thing I was going to talk about with this, actually. So when I was 13 years old, I had disclosed sexual abuse and became a troubled teen. And I was put in a group home. And during my time in the group home, daily we had pimps at the door, trying to drive us to the mall, trying to, do different things to get us and to groom us. And there was also a police task force called the Pimp Task Force that they would come in, they would give us lectures, talk to us about North Preston's finest and this and that. And in the early 90s at this time, street child prostitution was huge. You could walk down Hollis Street at any day of the week, any time, and see 12, 13, 14-year-old girls on Hollis Street openly selling sex. And all of these girls were being pimped by organized crime leaders. And that continues to this day. And here in Nova Scotia, we do see this continuously. Various groups, including the Hells Angels, trafficking women here in the province, online, on the street, and bringing them across the country to traffic them. It is 100% connected. And anyone that says otherwise, I would laugh, because I've seen it firsthand. I know the individuals involved. I understand the structure, and I understand that the majority of women who are being pimped are not even fully aware of who their actual pimp is, because the way that the structure is the pimp has another woman who is a higher ranking woman that does the pimping for them, and you don't even necessarily meet the man at the top. And that's how it goes. So 100%, Lenore, yes, it is connected.
Thank you. I don't think I have any more time, but Ms.
You gotta
Baptiste?
go ahead.
Ms. Baptiste?
It's probably a bit different out here in BC. We do have organized crime. I wouldn't say it's 100%. There's a lot more Romeo boyfriends, and that phenomena of grooming girls at 17 to get them in at 18. So there's a bit of a different dynamic out here.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Perry?
While we do have organized crime here in Toronto and in Northern Ontario. Galloway boys are big in Thunder Bay, Ontario. They have infestation of Toronto gangs up in Northern Ontario, bringing girls out. But we also have Asians that are the triads that are, basically own all the massage parlors and that are given, licenses by the city of Toronto to, keep open and keep servicing men. So, and we also have North Preston's finest too. It's not so big. We don't have street prostitution like it used to be here in Southern Ontario.
Thank you so much. I think that's all the time I've got.
Well, maybe Janet.
Okay, great.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Ms. Gobert. You're on mute.
No, she's not, but
Oh.
I can't hear you. We'll get that solved in a moment. We need to move on to our next questioner for 6 minutes. And that is Madame Bérubé. S'il vous plaît, 6 minutes.
Please, 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm on the Abitibi-Jambi territory of the Cree Anishinaabe unceded territory. This is very moving what you've all said. You're very courageous to be here with the committee. I have to say that you've lived horrible things. You've experienced violence and other things, and I congratulate you for your strength coming here to talk to us. So we're talking about traffic in young children that starts. How do you know that those children have reached that point of being trafficked? Is there a process that happens? And also, how did you manage to get out of this? So I'd like to hear each of you speak. Thank you.
Go ahead, Karen. Would you like to start?
Sure. Can everybody hear me okay? Sorry, I lost the plot here. For me personally, how did I get out of human trafficking? I was arrested. I was beaten, stabbed in the stomach, my face smashed in, my teeth knocked out. And one of my neighbors called the police. The police came, brought me to the hospital, and then proceeded to put handcuffs on me. They said that the man, who was my pimp, accused me of stabbing him in the shoulder, and therefore they arrested me with assault causing bodily harm and assault with a weapon. I ended up in jail in Toronto, and I finally got to call my mom. And those of you that know my mom know she's a fighter. My mom actually took on the Supreme Court of Canada and won Jordan's Principle, along with Jeremy Beadle and Marina Beadle. My mother is also a social worker, and she saw those signs of what was happening to me. She tried to intervene, but I was lost. I was in love. I thought that I knew the world, and I didn't listen, and I left. And she actually worked with a police officer named Tony Ryda in Toronto. He was part of the Toronto Prostitution Task Force. And he kept her updated every day that he would see me on the street. He would talk to me and say, your mom wants you to come home. And I would ignore him. But that day that I was arrested was actually my saving grace, because I didn't go back there. Even though I had boundaries that I wasn't allowed to leave Toronto, and my house was actually within an area where I wasn't allowed to be, my mom came up and she worked with the courts to be able to have me allowed to go back to Nova Scotia. And when I went back to Nova Scotia, I was able to get into Taiwak housing, which is a subsidized Indigenous housing in Halifax. And I proceeded to go to family court to win back custody of my two youngest daughters, who were had temporary custody orders with my pimp sister. And I won. And then my life changed from there. I think if we look at what are the signs is that all of a sudden, a daughter or a two-spirited person all of a sudden is in love and keeping secrets parents having lots of money, taking off without telling their mother where they're going, talking about dreams in other cities, keeping the person they're dating under wraps, not wanting to introduce them to the parents. There's a number of different red flags, but ultimately, I think one of my suggestions of what needs to happen, speaking from my experience, my mother's experience, we need to have a full support system for parents and loved ones who are trying to get their daughters out and trying to get their daughters home. My mother, she did it alone. And luckily for that connection with Tony Rida, that she felt that she was connected, that she knew that her daughter was alive. So that support needs to happen. And by the time the police find you in one province, it's so quick to be gone to another province, and then the search happens again. And our parents, our loved ones, they need the support and love to be able to continue this fight.
Another, someone else, Ms. Perrier, Trish, somebody? Go ahead, Trish.
So what we're seeing is the grooming process. In the grooming process, it would be done by either the bottom bitch, which is the one, and, you know, I'm going to use the terminology, you know, what traffickers use. So the grooming process consists of either getting them in debt with drugs or, you know, giving them, you know, purses, whatever. I was groomed by my own sibling. Like, it was really easy. I just was amazed that there was someone that looked like me, that spoke like me, you know, and she was fully involved in prostitution, you know, had already been introduced at the age of 11, that, you know, she brought her younger sister, and it was, you know, very easy. And like, see, traffickers don't take empowered young girls under their wing. I've never met an empowered young girl get pulled into prostitution. Usually they know, you know, the broken home, the sexually abused, you know, it's a sexual traumatic event. You know, any girl, young girl or young LGBTQ person that has had some sort of trauma is very vulnerable. And we have to, you know, look at that vulnerability. I know Detective Rida really well. And, you know, back then he was the morality unit, you know, he was, you know, he used to try to do things to scare us out of the game, and we'd just look at him like, you know, and you know, for me, what happened to me was I was in jail, and, you know, I got out of jail 3 days before my son died, you know, and I had to go through that, losing a child that lived, you know, my son had leukemia. He was very vulnerable. I could have brought him home any kind of illness. And, you know, I had to, you know, pinky promise him that I would never go back to work. You know, I kept that pinky promise, but, you know, I had, you know, good parents, and, you know, still it was like, I remember, you know, not being able to breastfeed my first child because of, you know, the dissection of what happened to me in my body. So I'll pass it off to Trisha.
Very quickly, Trish, we need to get to our next questioner. Are you okay?
Sorry.
Yep, I've got the same thing.
Right? If you want to see grooming, it looks so different today than it did 30 years ago. You need to go online. That's where it's happening. It's happening on Snapchat. It's happening on Twitter. It's happening online. And the best resource to find out what grooming looks like right now is a website called, what's it called? It's by Gail Dines. And her website is, I'll get it to you guys. I will. Sure. It's absolutely the best website for dealing with that. How I got out, I don't think there's a story there. I met great people. They helped me. I got out. What I want to talk about is my friends who had to move mountains to get out because they were Indigenous. Here in Vancouver, Aboriginal housing is right next to our downtown east side, which is right next to our drug dealers, and then the services to help them get out are 2 blocks away from the stroll. And apparently this is so they feel safe in the neighborhood and they can find resources in the neighborhood. I would argue that keeps them in. My friends who lived in, I you know, I was able to live with my kids in a neighborhood outside of Vancouver. No one ever put me together with my kids. For women in Aboriginal housing who use Aboriginal services, it's not, it is using services and it is trying to get out, but it's also a way to keep them under surveillance. And they're never given a chance to get under that thumb, out from under that thumb, unless they have people who are really rallying and working with them. And I think that's very unfair. I think it's unfair that I get to leave the area of my exploitation and they have to live there. It's just, we need to be looking at things like that.
Thanks very much. Ms. Blaney, please go ahead. 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair. And I want to thank all of you for your testimony. And I think the history of Indigenous women being trafficked is a Canadian history so far back. I think of my granny who was in residential school and at 16 got married off to a carpenter in the community that was significantly older than her. And I remember hearing that story and thinking, oh, well, that explains some things. So I just want to thank you all for telling that story and for also understanding how systemic it is in our system. I guess my first question is going to come to you, Karen. You talked about money being cut while the government is cutting while you're being asked to do even more. And I heard from testimony from everyone about the lack of resources, not knowing where to put people who are trying to escape trafficking. So I wondered if I can come to you first, Karen, and then if I can come to you, Ms. Gobert, because I haven't heard from you yet. I would love to have you answer that question, then I'll continue on. So Karen, for you first. Thank you.
Certainly. So shortly after I began this role, just a little over 3 years ago, we received $100,000 per year for a 3-year period through our national umbrella organization, NWAC, for federal core funding. However, leading up to the end of that agreement, there still is no decision being made. So now we are faced with the fact of, if we do not get money into our bank account from federal core funding, then we will lose a large portion of capacity that we currently have at Nova Scotia Native Women's Association. So we have secured long-term provincial core funding. However, that only pays for our, rent and the salary of our core staff, which would be 3 individuals. It certainly is by no means enough doing this valuable work. I might also mention the only other thing that is keeping us afloat at the moment is our short-term funding that we receive from WAGE for a couple of different projects. So part of the problem here is the project proposal-based funding continues to keep us into a state of survival. And when we're in a state of survival, we cannot look at those long-term goals. How do we plan 5 to 10 years out if we don't even know if we'll have funding to exist then, or if we'll have the programs and services that we need to support? So 100%. And with the Jane Paul Center, we have received 5 years, so we have 3 years left of short-term, like the 5-year funding from the Department of Justice, and that is in the amount of $150,000. That does not even pay salaries. It literally pays the rent and utilities and insurance to keep the doors open. So we need a commitment from Canada to say these programs and services and the organizations delivering them are important, and that they deserve an investment of sustainability, because we know that this issue is not going to go away overnight. And, simply put, I guess I'll just leave it there.
Ms. Gobert, could you try again with your mic? Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Good.
Yes.
Perfect. So I can't speak from personal experience, but however, as the community initiatives coordinator in dealing with this group of women, housing was definitely an issue. Approximately a year ago, the Friendship Center, we had opened up a men's shelter. And however, we've seen a transition happen with the client base that was accessing that. And so right now we're in the I'll say, beginning steps of actually transitioning that into a women's shelter for those that have been affected by human trafficking. As Karen has said, funding is definitely an issue. Right now, we are using funds that we have received from head office for the COVID-4 round of funding. Yes, we do have short-term funding from WAGE as well, but I guess what our issue is when we look at transitioning this to a women's shelter, we're looking at little blocks according to our funding. So right now we would only be looking at operating for a 1-year period. Is it absolutely necessary that we have this long term? Yes, it is. We cannot offer service without keeping these women safe. So without having that shelter for these women, our work is pointless.
Thank you for that. And Ms. Pierre, you talked about, people having to stay in your house because there's nowhere to send them. So I'm just curious if you could talk about the concern you have around a limit of resources and not having a place to send folks so that they are safe.
So, there's a lot of money. I'm seeing millions of dollars put for initiatives, but nobody's opened up on site, three siloed, safe space for women. I can't send these women to battered women's shelters because, first of all, they're putting the other women at risk, and cross-contamination happens. And I don't think that that's where where healing begins, and I think we need to have our individualized area and treatment centers. It's all, to me, to be really truthful, and I'm here to speak the truth, it's a big cash cow. Human trafficking is a new thing, and it's, people are just, eloquently writing proposals, getting millions of dollars and doing nothing. And, and a prime picture is Thunder Bay, Ontario, Toronto, Ontario. We have nowhere to send Indigenous women who are exiting the sex trade, unless I farm them out to Manitoba, but they're at capacity too. So we have nowhere for them.
Well, thank you so much. And
my time.
We're going to go on now to the next round. And I think, judging by the clock, we'll have at least one intervention from each of the parties represented on the committee. So Gary Vidal, you are up first for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too want to thank our witnesses today. I'm not going to pretend to be able to even acknowledge the pain and the suffering that you've experienced in some of your journeys, because I can't even imagine that. But I want to thank you for coming and sharing your journeys with us to help us understand this as parliamentarians and to try to move forward in a way that might offer some solutions to the future. So I appreciate that. Over 50% of the survivors of sex trafficking in Canada are Indigenous women and girls, even though it's 4% of the population that they make up. And this is obviously a huge challenge. I want you to think and you've referred to a number of things as the different witnesses have spoke. I mean, we talked about the child welfare system. We talked about public policy changes. We talked about exit strategies. We've talked about a number of different things. What I'm looking for from each of you is just a recommendation that would be very significant from a prevention perspective. I get the challenges exit-wise, but how do we stop it in the first place? What are some really practical things that the Government of Canada could do that would help to prevent young women and ladies even being put in this place? So I think maybe I'll start with Ms. Gobert, because she hasn't had an awful lot of opportunity today, and then just each of the other witnesses, if you want to just take a minute in my time and answer that question if you could. So, Ms. Gobert.
Sure. When we talk about empowerment, I'm not sure which witness had said that empowerment of girls, they will not be able to be trafficked. And that is something that has been discussed over and over again within our board. And so what we were looking at is, in regards to that, is going into the schools. I know it has been done over and over, but switching it with a cultural aspect to it. And that is what we're going to be attempting to do.
Who'd like to go? Go ahead.
First off, in Nova Scotia, one simple way to prevent future human trafficking is to stop the Goldboro LNG mining plant that is scheduled to happen. The Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia will own a work camp with 5,500 temporary workers that'll be located just outside the borders of Buckinghamg First Nation. I guarantee you there is no training we can do. There is no policies that we can put in place to keep our women safe and our girls safe and our Two-Spirit safe. So if and when Indigenous women and girls or Two-Spirit people get harmed from this project, it'll end up being the Mi'kmaq liable because they own the work camp. This needs to end. We do not need this. The Mi'kmaq will not benefit enough to risk our lives and to gamble the well-being of our communities in order to house this project. And I guarantee you that will prevent human trafficking in Nova Scotia.
Next, Ms. Perrier.
So we're going to go back to empowerment and I think we need to teach our boys not to rape. I think it's not about our little girls. Why is it always put on us females to have to bear the brunt of men's bad behaviors? I think we need to have buyer bewares throughout Canada, that if you're in this city, this territory to buy sex, you're going to be publicly shamed. If you put accountability on the men that are causing the problem, then, and putting a revenue type thing on it, like, making more sex buyer busts, making them pay for us. I really think that when you tell them, hey, if you're caught buying sex in this neighborhood, your car's going to be uploaded, your vehicle's going to be tagged, and your wife's going to get a letter, or your spouse, or your work, whatever. Because I just think that, we need to enlighten our, put the onus back on the buyers. So that's my whole thing. It's the buyers. If we didn't have the demand, we wouldn't have this problem.
Tricia, would you like to come into this?
So I went to Sweden for 3 days. I was invited by the government to study their prostitution law they had just passed. And I think we need to do two things that they did. One was public education. So all across transit, like airports everywhere, welcome, buying sex is a crime. And they actually believe that. And they actually ingrained it into the fiber of their society. 2 seconds, I went to a high school there because I wanted to talk to kids who had grown up under the new prostitution laws. I had 17-year-old girls tell me that they would not date boys who had looked at porn because they knew how much they were worth. Because this law changed the way they saw each other and the way they interacted. If we want to change a country, we change the laws. And we want laws that say this is ridiculous and you can go to jail for treating our women this way.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for that testimony. Jaime Batiste, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. And my question is going to be for Karen Pictou. And Karen, I want you to talk a little bit about the Jane Paul Center and the Resiliency Center that you have planned. How are these important examples of how we can use part of the money with the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Group to prevent violence against women, and racism as well?
Hi. So I did speak a little bit about the Jane Paul Center and the Resiliency Center. Essentially, the prevention work would be in family healing, empowerment, like we talked about. It wouldn't just be open for victims or for survivors. It's open to all of our community members to take part in healing activities, to do different things culturally based that have to provide opportunity, to provide training, to provide support, to provide community and acceptance, eliminating stigma, all of those things. The Jane Paul Center every day works to prevent death, to prevent violence. I believe, the work that we're doing. We have about 10 volunteers, not so much right now because of COVID, but 10 volunteers that come and work out of the Jane Paul Center that used to be former clients. And so that speaks to something we are doing is working, and it needs to be recognized. And one of the ways I believe that we're going to prevent is that future generation, like I said, to build up our own identities as Mi'kmaq women and understanding our key role within family, within community, within our society. And that needs to get returned to us. Another way will be around having space and place. So with the human trafficking, for example, in Nova Scotia, the Highway 102 is the human trafficking corridor to the rest of the country. The majority of women that are coming out of human trafficking across Canada started in Nova Scotia. And believe you me, we may not talk about it a lot. As you know, Jaime, a lot of times our women are stigmatized when they come forward and they talk about these types of things that have happened to them. So a lot of times they're silenced. However, this building, our resiliency center, will be a beacon of hope. You will see our building from the 102, and it'll be a beacon of hope that if a woman can just get to our door, they'll be okay. And I guarantee that they will be okay. Another thing that we're doing is we work in partnership. So we don't want to duplicate services from any other organization. So we work very closely with the YWCA and the Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Center. So one of the things that I'm doing in Sydney today is actually going to view some real estate. The Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Center and I and Native Women's are partnering to open a home for women exiting human trafficking, as well as for women who are in need of safe space. And it will be located in Sydney. It'll be owned and operated by Indigenous women. And although that is a response to human trafficking, I know that it'll also work as prevention because our communities will be aware. There will be education. These women will survive and they'll be able to grow healthy families. So sorry for the long-winded response. Try to get a lot in a short period of time.
No, it was a good response. And one of the things I've always been curious about is if there's someone out trying to seek to leave trafficking and if someone's in crisis or they feel they're invulnerable, what are the supports available for that person? Can they just call 911? Do they have culturally sensitive, relevant support available so that they can just dial a number or make a text or log onto a website? What would someone be able to do? If you could tell me, and what is that working?
Certainly, I suppose you could call 911. I don't know that really is the way that it ever happens, though. Yeah, I'm not aware of that. I do know that we do have a strong response within the police system in Nova Scotia, and we are very well connected with Constable David Lane, who heads that group. And they're certainly doing a lot to try to address this issue, but it's not working. It's not enough. And Constable David Lane would be the first to tell you that his back really is against the wall a lot of times. As soon as they start getting a track on someone, it's like moved into a new province. And then it's this whole jurisdictional issue of trying to then get the other province up to speed, et cetera, et cetera. Long story short, any woman that contacts Nova Scotia Native Women's Association any time of day, whether it's through our Ring doorbell on the Jane Paul Center that they can access someone any time of day, or at our new Resiliency Center, once that's built, that'll have the same capability of being able to push that Ring doorbell. We'll bring them through to a safe space that is through gun-proof glass even, to hold them there until we can get them to safety. And like the other lady had talked about, if need be, we would bring them to our own home and we have done, and we will continue to do that, but we shouldn't have to. In Nova Scotia, the only shelter available for women exiting human trafficking is church-based. I don't need to explain to you how problematic that is for Indigenous women and girls here in Nova Scotia, and there needs to be alternatives, and that's why Pam Glode and I are ensuring that, you know, with no money, we have no funding to do this. We're just doing it based on what we can gather up from donations to buy this building and to get it started. And we believe that when we build it, the opportunity will come.
Thank you. Madam Bérubé, are you able to pose your question?
Yes, sorry. I had to leave for a moment. So earlier, you were saying that you had questions or demands to make. What are they? I think it was for Madame Gobert. Earlier, when you spoke, you said there were programs that were offered, education programs. There was a Pandora's box, that there were political changes to be brought about. And I wanted to know what your recommendations are at the political level to change these possibilities.
Within this community, I understand that all of the other witnesses are from larger centers, and this is quite a small community. And what we have found is there is such a roadblock when it comes to the RCMP and keeping these women safe. We talked, I believe it was Karen that mentioned regarding access, and I like what she had said regarding this beacon and being able to press a button. That was something else that we had come into problems with, and so there was no funding. So actually how we fixed that was I now have a cell phone that is kept on 24 hours so that I can get out and help these women. As regards to political change, I'm sorry, I'm at an impasse. I do not know what I could recommend at this point. All I know is that something needs to change in order to keep our women safe.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Madam Bérubé. Rachel Blaney, go ahead, please.
Well, thank you, Chair. And if I could come to Trish, you didn't get a chance to answer my question. And I think the way that I'll frame it specifically for you, just based on your previous testimony, you talked about the area where Indigenous trafficked persons are, and the fact that the Aboriginal housing is right there, the services are a couple blocks away, and they're staying in that area because they don't have an alternative. So when we talk about having the resources to support people who are trying to get out, you talked about the ability to leave and how beneficial that is for you. I'm just wondering if that is that a gap that you see in this particular case?
It's a huge gap, actually. Although, so there's a bit of a push and pull, right? Like some women are scared of leaving the area. They've never really left the area before. What does it mean to be out of the area? And so some do feel more comforted being in the area, right? But, you know, like my girlfriend, she has 3 kids. She lives in Aboriginal housing, which is not even 500 meters away from where we used to work, right? And so now she's taking her kids by there, and it's just triggering her every day. How do you stay sober when you're triggered every day, right? And in Vancouver here, I think you're from BC, aren't you? Okay, so we call it poverty pimping, right? So we have these monolithic organizations who try to take over every project that comes up, and in doing that traps everyone in this I don't know, I'll be generous, 10 by 10 square block part of the city. And then turn and look at people and say, look, they have all the resources they need. No, they don't have anything. They don't, we in Vancouver here, we have harm reduction. We don't have recovery. That's too expensive. We don't have detox beds. That costs money. Harm reduction, giving a condom and a needle, is the cheapest way to deal with this issue. And we need to find the political will to actually put money into resources that say we value our women. Not only our Indigenous women, who are absolutely owed that, but women, period. We have a prime minister who wants to say we have a feminist government or feminist country. I call bullshit on that. Like, I still can't get a peace bond for a woman who's black and blue. I still can't get police to take trafficking seriously. And I hate the word trafficking. It's prostitution. Trafficking is just a new fancy label for something that's been going on for millennia, which is men's sexual abuse of women, right? Oh God, sorry, I went on a tirade. Yeah. So what I think would be beneficial is to create programs outside the demographic of where women are abused and slowly work them into communities outside of what they know. I succeeded because I'm not walking by a crack dealer to go get milk. I'm not walking, down the street and every third car is asking me if I'm for sale. We need to change we need to change the lived conditions of women, but by that I mean we need to expand the parameters of where they can live, because we've shortened them to these little spaces that entrap them in the cycle over and over and over again. Okay, done. Sorry.
Wow, that's amazing. Members of the committee and witnesses, the analysts are tasked to provide our committee with a summary of the evidence from you, the witnesses. That's for our reference when the committee does reconvene, whenever that may be. But may I say on behalf of the committee, I'm so thankful for having had the opportunity to be in your presence and hear what you have to say, because the subtext for me is the self-esteem that you have, considering what you've been through in your life journeys. And it would be very easy for any one of you to basically give up. And here you are fighting for what you know is right based on your experience. And I think that all of us need to learn that no matter where we are and whatever the influences that have been on our life, there's still a better outcome available if only we strive toward that. And that's why you are here today. Our analysts will be capturing that. We're not finished with the study, but on behalf of all of our committee, I want to thank you so much. This has been life-changing, I'm sure, for all of us. And with that, I would like to ask for a motion to adjourn. Ms. Zan, Ms. Blaney, all in favor? This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, ladies.